Well, it's a privilege this morning to have John Hammond with us to share. I've known John for the best part of 25 years. I think he even refers to me as a friend, even though I've asked him to do this task for us today. John, you have a past life as an educator that's taken you pretty much all over the Pacific, hasn't it?
I guess my work has taken me to 140 countries, so it's... but a lot of it was within the Pacific, yeah.
Yep. And at one stage you were the education director for our church schools here in Queensland.
Yes, and so I'm in familiar territory.
So some of you will know John from those days. John, you then went on to become the education director for all of our church schools in Australia before retirement.
That's right.
John lives in Cooranbong and with his wife Sue, and you have three
children, yep, and 5 grandchildren.
5 grandchildren. Wow. He's very passionate about his family. If you want to get him talking about his family over lunch, he'd be more than most welcome to your inquiries. John, we welcome you to the pulpit, and I know that God will bless you as you share with us today.
Thank you very much, Ray and Laurie, for your prayer. You actually promoted me to a pastor. In actual fact, I haven't been pasteurised. I'm an ordinary old brother. And it is so nice to be back. And you're welcome. So kind, Ray. I can hardly wait to hear what I have to say. The theme that I've chosen for the weekend is Coming Ready or Not. And the Lord is coming. Now, I don't think there are any people here who would doubt that. But the devil is a very smart enemy. He's had thousands of years of practice. And as we heard from Sabbath school this morning, he has very cleverly and cunningly changed the day of worship from the Sabbath of the Lord to the day of the sun. And his ultimate work is to prove that he is the ruler of the universe. And to do that, he says, of course, there is no God. Now, everybody here believes in God, but if there are any young people here who are contemplating going to a university, let me tell you, a university is a very godless place. And if you want to meet somebody smarter than yourself, just go to the university. There are some highly intelligent people, and a lot of them have extremely messed up personal lives. But because they are professors, because they are the almighty lecturer and have so much power, and because they convincingly tell you that there is no God, students believe it. And I praise the Lord, I never went to university till I was 30. Don't think that I'm that clever, because I left school at 15, having failed everything. If you want to learn true humility, let your younger brother get 4 years ahead of you in school. I was as thick as a brick. And I know now that the Lord intended that. He wanted me to have a hard time in school, and I'll be talking about that after lunch, if you can stay awake, after a good lunch. So I left school. I dug ditches, drove semi-trailers for a few 100,000 miles and did everything, and got married. And my wife, without whom I'd be nothing, I taught for 7 years as a primary school teacher. And then I went to university because they asked me to be a demonstration teacher in a high school. And I thought, well, I better get off my rear end and get a degree. So I started uni 4 nights a week for 3 or 4 years. It was hard work. And eventually I got into an honours year. I wanted to do a PhD, and I wanted to skip having to do a master's. So if you got first class honours, you can go straight on and do a doctorate. So I was in a class, and it was a relatively small postgraduate class, and it was philosophy. Now, let me tell you, if you want to do well in philosophy at university, it does help to be a little bit mad. And we had a professor, and he was worldwide known, and I don't know whether this is apocryphal or not, but apparently it was Professor Tanner who set an exam for 100 or so final year students, 3 hours with a biro scratching away on paper. But he only set one question, and the question only had one word, and that was why. And so 100 students sit down and they frantically, for 3 hours, filling about 20 pages, ponder on why. The student who got the top mark walked out after 2 minutes. His answer was very simple. Why not? And so it was this department into which I was a student, and after 2 weeks, the professor, to his great delight, discovered, as he put it, a member of the God Squad. And he stopped the class one day because I had answered a question, and he said, "Do you actually believe that there is a God?" I said, "Yes," somewhat nervously. "Really?" "Yes." "How could you?" Smirks appearing on every face except mine. He said, "I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to have a debate in 3 weeks. And I'm going to allow you to get up, and I'll give you 45 minutes. And you can argue your case for there being a God." He said, "I'm going to bring up a professor who is a lady at Macquarie University, and she will hate you, and she will smash you because she hates God." Well, Big Mouth Hammond said, "Well, that's really good. If she hates God, it must believe that he is in existence." He said, "You save your smart words for 3 weeks." So I bravely walked out. I went home, as you would, terrified. I thought, what am I going to do? What am I going to talk about? How can I convince university students who are schooled by very, very clever people, and the theory of evolution, the theory of this, and Marxism, and everything, and I've got to get up and talk for 45 minutes. Oh boy. I thought, well, if I say that last night as I was driving home, I looked up at the sky. It was beautiful. And my thoughts just welled up within me that here was the master artist at work. They would laugh me off the campus for saying that. So I dispense with that one. So I thought things through, and I prepared a number of arguments. The great day arrived. I don't think I slept much the night before. And when I woke, it had been raining all night. It was pouring. And the level on the creeks were going up, and I thought, well, maybe the roads between Cooranbong and Newcastle University are flooded. Maybe a bridge has washed away, and I sort of was very hopeful. But no, it stopped raining after lunch, and it was due for 7 o'clock. I drove in, and I was really scared. I was praying. Can you just imagine how frightened I might have been? I mean, I'd come through by this stage of university education, but I was up against a very, very smart opponent who was bitter. I didn't know who she was, but he had told me, the professor, my own professor, had told me that she was going to make absolute mincemeat of me. Well, I arrived early and I sat there at 1:45. There was only a class of 12. 300 turned up. The word got around. And I said, oh, 300 people, surely I'm in the wrong lecture theatre. And I got these grins, oh, we're looking forward to your presentation. So, oh boy. 5-2, I'm looking around to see my opponent, whether she had blood-stained fangs and claws. Wasn't there. And my professor, he wandered off to his office to make a phone call. He came back at 7:10. The crowd's getting restless. He is as white as a sheet. I said, what's the matter? She's not coming. Oh, really? Really? And then he said, she took her own life this morning. I was in total shock. I wouldn't wish that upon her. He said, you've got an hour and a half. I said, it won't take that long. So I got up. I said to the students, I said, look, my view is likely to be different to yours, and at least do me the courtesy of listening to me, because this comes from the heart. I said, I'm going to do three things tonight. I'm going to give a personal testimony. Folk, the strongest sermon you will ever preach will be the story of how Jesus has redeemed you. Okay? Never forget that. He said, I'm going to Bible bash you. I'm going to give you evidence from the Bible. And then I'm going to use logic, because this is a philosophy class. So I started off. I told them the story of my father and mother. And if this thing works, if I haven't ruined all your AV equipment, that's a good sign. Just go to the next one. That's my mum and dad. Dad would have been 100 2 weeks ago. And I'm a Kempsey boy. And Dad was a doctor in town and doing very well. Amazingly, 73 years later, my son is a doctor in the same town. It's amazing how the wheel turns a full circle in life. And Dad got a call one day from the division office. Would you go to Jamaica as a missionary? He said, no. I've got a new house, paying off a mortgage, got a new car, got 3 small boys. I'm just brought into a practice, and your timing is not at all good. Put down the phone, end of story. Not with God. He talked it over with my mother, and after a few weeks, I said, look, if they ask again, I think we should go. Mum said, yeah. The phone rang, and it was the division president 30 minutes later. If you think it was a miracle, it wasn't quite, because my grandmother knew, and she rang the division president and said, I think the bait is ready now, you can ring again. And so, anyhow, Dad said yes, and we packed our bags. One of my early memories, I was 4, was this packing crate that high. It was actually probably only that high. And I had Hammond, Kingston, Jamaica. Phone rang again. And it was somebody from the division office, and a lot of humming and hawing. And my dad said, what do you want? We're wondering whether you could go somewhere else. Yes? Where? More humming and more howling. And then he said, to Penang in Malaya, as it was then, it's Malaysia now. Dad said, really? And, oh yeah, just a matter of changing the tickets and the address, and we'll go. He hung up. And then half an hour later, Dad rang and said, what's going on? Why? Well, the doctor there's left. Why? Well, he's left in a bit of a hurry. Why? He said, you better square with me. So he said, well, actually, a war has just broken out. And it's called the Communist Terrorist Emergency. Every European head is now worth $5,000 attached or otherwise. Oh, and then just before he hung up, he said, there is also a problem with snakes. This was shortly after the war. The infrastructure had broken down, and snakes were everywhere. And they weren't ordinary snakes, they were cobras. And so with those words in mind, on the 4th of October, 1949, we got onto a Constellation, flew to Darwin, Singapore, then up to Penang, and we were in our new house. There we are. So there we are, there's my two brothers and myself. I'm the good-looking one and Blondie in the middle. And we actually stole that trishaw shortly afterwards, so it was not a very happy trishaw driver. He caught us. And next slide. And there is us growing up. Now, next slide. A cobra. A cobra stands up when it's angry. That's a king cobra, by the way, a hamadryad. I have seen a skeleton of a hamadryad this long. Meet the longest poisonous snake in the world. When you get bitten by a cobra, particularly a king cobra, you've got about 25 minutes. They didn't have antivenin in those days. The very first morning, Dad stepped out barefoot and put his foot onto the back of a 13-foot hamadryad king cobra. We had just been there one night. He slammed the door so fast and so quickly, he almost left his foot outside. And he came in and said to my mother, "Don't unpack. There's a plane going home to Singapore and then to Australia tomorrow, and the Hammond family is going to be on it." Sat down and we had breakfast. And I can remember it, because Dad's hands were shaking. He wasn't a person who was given to fright. He'd had a big fright. He said, "Look, we've got 3 small boys, and it is so dangerous here. We have made a mistake." I see the devil was whispering in his ear. Fortunately, the Lord was whispering in the other ear, because Dad announced. Anybody here ever know my dad? He was an orthopedic surgeon. Yeah, he replaced over 4,000 hips. He was brilliant. Anyhow, he said, "I'm going to put God to the test." He said, "We're going to pray. I'm going to take my Bible and I'm going to open it without looking and just put my thumb inside. And if there is not a message from God, a specific message from God, we'll go home." So we did that. And he opened his Bible and he read a text. I don't have to look it up, because it is our family's favourite text. Luke chapter 10 and verse 19, "Behold, I give unto you power to tread on snakes and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you." Full stop, amen. And he said to Mum, "I think we'd better stay." We stayed there for 12 years. I grew up there. I grew up and lived within meters of where Amy was born. I discovered I had a sister in Christ last night that we'd never met before. It was lovely. And in that 12 years, we killed 12 cobras in the bathroom alone. Not counting the rest of the house. Or other types of snakes. I mean, I can remember going to the bathroom in the middle of the night at the age of 7 and opening the bathroom door. There was a step down. It was an oriental type bathroom where the shower just went onto the floor, and the snakes used to love to lie on that floor, Can you imagine opening the door, turning on the light, and they're just coiled? Oh, it's a great big snake. Oh. I hope you brought some heart pills with you. Just remember, I'm talking to 300 university students, and I didn't do that, so I apologise. I mean, we were having lunch on Sunday, and we had a bottle on the table with a baby cobra in it, and his mother came in looking for it. And first we knew was when the servant dropped the dish of nasi goreng, and we tore out the house and rang Dad, who was in the middle of an operation. And he said to Letha, just keep the patient ticking over a few minutes, I've got to go home. And he came home and got rid of the snake, and went back and finished the operation. Simple. The big danger was the, next slide, communist terrorists. Every European on the island had one of these. 1940 Mercury or Ford, and there was half a ton of armour plate there. And the windscreen flaps down, then there's a tiny slit. And but the bandits were smart. They would chop a tree down behind you on a jungle trail, then they would chop a tree down in front. Can you take this and take it upstairs? It should work now. What have I been doing wrong? There we are. Isn't it marvellous when 11-year-old boys are smarter than you? They would chop a tree down behind and chop a tree down in front and wait for you to get up, because there was no air conditioning in those cars, and they would just shoot you. The other trick was to come to your front door at 1 o'clock in the morning. You open the door and bang. They got our neighbour across the road that way. And finally we got the knock on the door at 2 in the morning. And Dad went to the door, stood behind a post, and he said in Malay, Chinese, Tamil and English, "Who is it?" What's the word, Amy? Berapa itu? Finally, they said, "Sir, there is a sick man here. We need your help." So Dad went out, and he said, "There's only two of you. Where's the sick man?" "In the car." So Dad had to walk out to the car believing he was on the last stretch of footpath of his life. But in the back he saw a man who was very, very sick with a ruptured appendix, a young man. And he said, "Take him to the hospital." "Why didn't you take him to the government hospital?" They said, "Come back in the morning." I think we're all familiar with that. And he took his appendix out, saved his life. And I've got a photo of the young man that he saved. And Amy and anybody from Malaysia, when I tell you the name of this young man, it was enough to make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. Oh, that's our car, by the way, Little Morris, Oxford. And that is the young man. His name was Chin Peng. Does that ring a bell? Chief of all communist terrorists in Southeast Asia. Had a huge price on his head. And he was in hospital for 3 weeks. Dad never charged him anything. He talked to him on a topic he'd never heard before, and that was the Lord Jesus Christ. And that man left, and the war continued for 11 years. And many, many people died. You know, they never caught him. He's only just died recently. They never caught him. He hid in the jungles up near Thailand. And the day before we left, we got a knock on the door, and I opened the door, and there was a Chinese man there. He said, "Dr. Hammond there?" I said, "No, he went back to Australia last week." "Is your mother there?" "Yeah." He said, "Can I come in?" So I said, "La Chapeng, come in." He sat down and he asked my mother if she could remember this patient. She couldn't remember. He pulled out a piece of paper about A size, and I could see that it was a poster. He said this poster went to every single communist camp in the country. And it was in Malay and Chinese. I could read the Malay. It said, this family, it had our photograph, the photograph of our car. Somebody had come into our house and gone into my mother's camphorwood chest and got the photo albums and got that photo. And there it was, and the message said, under no circumstances is this family ever to be harmed. This is my order of protection, signed Jinping. And so it was. The day before we left, we were given that extreme privilege of God just opening the windows of heaven ajar for us to get a glimpse of what he had done for us. I tell you what, when we get to the kingdom and we sit down with our guardian angel and see the story of our salvation, we will be utterly gobsmacked and humbled. I was talking to the university students, and one called out, wow, what a coincidence that was that you put your finger on that text. I said, there's a million texts in the Bible. It's going beyond coincidence. So then I said, now you've got to get some Bible bashing. Where would I start? Well, before that, I just forgot this. Isn't that a beautiful Rolls Royce? That's the car I drive every day to get the firewood, of course. I've got a picture of the same car. I'll just go. You can see the same car behind. He's standing behind a man who's looking very important, and he was. He was the governor, Sir Henry Gurney. And that's his Rolls Royce. That was the last photograph ever taken of him, because an hour later they ambushed him coming down from Fraser Hill and got 52 bullet holes in his car. He stepped out and he walked towards the machine gun nest of the ambush and was shot dead, saved his wife. There is the same car. I tracked it down in Penang, and there is his grave. Behold, I give you power to tread on snakes and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy, nothing will in any way hurt you. So I said, now I'm going to Bible bash. And if you're going to talk about God, you always talk somewhere about Daniel 2. And so I went through and I said, there is a statue. And the head of gold was Babylon, and the chest, of course, was Medo-Persia, then Greece, and then Rome. And somebody called out from the crowd, oh, of course it's accurate because it was written long after it all happened. I said, you know something about the Bible, but not enough. I said, Daniel, who wrote that under inspiration, was alive when the head of gold was in power, and for a little while when the Medo-Persia, I said he was dead when Greece rose to power, and he was extremely dead when Rome came to power, and the feet of iron and clay, which is today, he was dead, dead, dead. And that was written thousands of years ago, and it is spot on accurate. And by this time, of course, I was getting fired up. I'd lost my nerves. And I was saying, it happened. And the world chooses to disbelieve it. I said, you can argue black and blue, but the archaeology in the Bible, it will prove that he wrote that thousands of years ago, early in the piece. They were very quiet. I then moved to the next one, which I thought would be my weakest arguments. I said to them, how many students here I didn't have any slides, okay? We hardly had any electricity in those days. No, we had power. We had overhead projectors. I didn't have any pictures. I did have a slide of the statue. I said, how many students here believe that just forget that this picture's gone up. Just how many people here, the lecture theatre, believe that there are forces in existence outside of the human being? And almost everyone put their hand up. Because I knew that spiritualism was rife in that university. Friends, universities are extremely wicked places. I could put in an advert for Avondale College at this stage. With all its faults, it is God's place. Back to the university. I said, how many of you believe that some of these forces are not entirely good for us? A few hands went up. And we could call them bad. Now I said, this is a philosophy class, and I want to ask you a question based on logic, and if you are honest, you must answer me. I said, here is the logic. If there are evil forces, isn't it logical to say that there are good forces? Now, I'm not trying to say the good people are on this side and the evil people are this way, so maybe I have to switch it around. And I said, logically, I'm allowed to say that. They were sort of conceding it with the odd nod. There weren't many hands going up now, but I had 100% attention. Now I said, using logic, if there are evil forces and good forces, isn't it logical to assume that they might be in some sort of a contest with each other, that they disapprove of each other? And I said that there is a war going on beyond, behind and over us that we're not aware of. And I used a phrase that you will recognize, but they had never heard of it. I said, look, there might just be a great controversy happening. And it could have climactic results. They conceded that. I went for over an hour. And the meeting closed. You've got to remember, I'm still shaking in shock. One from fright and knowing that my opponent was dead. And how many times have I wondered with that poor woman, it was a she, I know that, what was going on in her mind and heart as a brilliant academic who professed a hatred of God to take her own life that day, knowing that she had an opportunity in her mind to smash the belief in God. I just pray in her last moments she gave some thought and perhaps some recognition, because God is a very kind judge. And that was the end. They went home. And I did say to them, we are living in a world where there are wolves amongst the sheep. I said, you students are so smart, but you have been deluded and you have not been given the opportunity to have God revealed to you. And there are wolves in sheep's clothing. So I've got a few wolves in sheep's clothing. I think photoshopping is just the most incredible thing. Oh no, these are real photographs, of course, yes. Beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. I like that one. And here was this fragile world floating in space, a planet in rebellion. And the prince of this world, he stole it. He stole it from God. And I always feel sorry for Adam and Eve. As they left that garden, their hearts must have been absolutely breaking. You know, I do a lot of work in the garden, and I love my workshop, and every time I hit my thumb with a nail or a thorn bush leaps out and attacks me, or I'm feeling hot and sweaty, I thought, God said, because of that sin, you will work by the sweat of your brow. Women will give birth in pain. And they were absolutely shattered. Have you ever stopped to think that God must have wept that night? He had made the highest possible thing, the greatest crowning achievement of all his creations. He made a duplicate of himself. And he would live with us and talk with us. And it was stolen from him. God is so patient. And the world has gone on. God is not mocked. Yeah, I've, like you, I stood by an open grave. And I've heard people crying, and they say, if there is a God of love, how could he do this? You know, there is a reason. My logic might be wrong, but I know you'll listen to me politely. The nature of sin was demonstrated fully at the moment of Christ's death. Do you agree with that? Why didn't God finish it then? Tell me, somebody. It's not a rhetorical question.
Sin had to fulfill its duty.
Sorry?
Sin had to fulfill its duty.
What was his duty?
The full character. Cup, running over.
Yeah.
He would have proved that the devil's statement was correct and that Christ was going to destroy anyone who was against him. Had a chance to hear about it.
I'm rapidly coming to the conclusion that people who live on the top side of the Tropic of Capricorn are pretty smart. There is another reason. People say, oh, well, if by living longer, by extending time, he's given us a chance to be saved. That's very true. But if we were to use that logic, he would never come, would he? The nature of sin was demonstrated. The whole universe saw how shocking and terrible, disgusting. I mean, sin doesn't upset us because we've been born in it and lived in it and swum in the stuff. But God said, I cannot come yet because I have to wait until the results of sin are demonstrated to the whole universe. Sin will never, ever rise again because the universe will have seen sin from its origins right to the end. Christ's crucifixion is in the middle. And so we live and we suffer, and God will come at the right time. The amazing thing is, and I just love this in great controversy, when the judgment takes place and Christ is raised up above the holy city and the redeemed are all in the world and the whole wicked universe is outside, and Satan will have marshaled the mighty generals from past years, and he will have convinced himself and his generals and all those with him that the battle is to be fought and Lucifer will win. But you want to read the words, when Christ is raised above the city, every being ever born and able to have a thought will call out, God is good. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Those are the words we're told that the entire universe will call out. David recorded them in the Psalms. It'll be a most incredible moment. I'm going to finish with a story, which is my ilk. Doesn't he look magnificent? That is Sir Cloudsley Cheval, spelt shovel, like Mrs. Bucket. And he was the admiral of the fleet. He was the most important naval officer in England. And the Navy was run, as Winston Churchill remarked, by the rum and the lash. And he was bringing his fleet home. They had been out at sea, and he had over 2,000 men on board, a number of ships. And they were headed, here he is again, Sir Cloudesley Shovel. There they were heading home. Now, by the way, my training is not in theology. I'm a geographer, and so we're doing a bit of geography. That's England, and off Land's End are the Scilly Isles. And at the very tip of the Scilly Isles is this rock. This is taken from space. It is called the Gilston Rock. And if you approach it by sea, that's what it looks like. It looks a bit menacing. Well, they were sailing into shore, and they were heading to Plymouth. And the boats always took a wide margin. Now, the problem with navigation in the 1700s was they knew latitude, that's the parallel lines, very easily. They could work that out, but the longitudinal, the vertical lines, you had to have an accurate timepiece, and it wasn't until John Harrison, because of this tragedy, fought for the £20,000 reward to develop an accurate clock. He was cheated out of it, but that's another story. They could never tell exactly how far east or west. They knew their latitude just by looking at the sun. And so they were sailing in darkness. Down below decks, there was an unnamed sailor who was just an ordinary seaman. He was very smart. He was also a native of the Scilly Isles. And he had been secretly keeping a log of where they were. And the penalty for that was death. But as they drew closer, he was saying to himself, "We've got to hit the Gilston Rock." And he became more and more convinced. Now, you've got to realize how smart some seamen can really be. I mean, I lived in the Pacific for a long time when I was principal of Fulton College. I remember being out on a boat, and we were lost at sea. And there was an old Samoan man in the boat with us. He said, "Everybody be quiet." He leaned over the front, and he just put his hands in the water, and he felt. And then he said, "That way." He took us home more clearly than any GPS. And this young man said, "What am I going to do? If I tell, I'll be killed. If I don't, I'll be killed." Sailors couldn't swim in those days. Finally, he went up on deck and he approached Sir Cloudesley. He knew he only had a couple of moments to say what he had to say because he would be silenced. He said, "Sir, we are about to hit the Gilston Rock." "How do you know, sir?" "I know." "Have you kept a log?" "Yes." In less than a minute, he had been hung from the yardarm. And in less than an hour, the whole fleet hit the Gilston Rock. 2,500 men were drowned, including Sir Cloudesley. He washed up on shore, and that's where they buried him. If you go there, see, that's a very old photograph. If you go there today, there is a monument. They exhumed him, and he was buried in Westminster Abbey. You see, on that fleet, they had the best navigators in the world. They had the most comprehensive charts. and they were the British Navy. Britain waives the rules, they said. I mean, rules the waves. You know, what waves the rules? Well, I really messed that one up. They knew what they were doing. But somebody in the minority had a conviction and really knew, and finally had the courage to do it and to tell, even if it did cost him life. The British Empire learnt a huge lesson out of this. Never more was the perceived ignorance of a sailor taken so much for granted. And there was an entirely uneducated man called John Harrison who developed the first chronometer. If you go to England, you want to go there to Greenwich and see H1, 2, 3 and 4, the 4 clocks that he developed. You know, last year I was in Russia with Pastor John Carter. And no, it was a year before now, I was in Ukraine, and for the same purpose, and I was flying between Prague and Kiev, and there was 2 young men next to me. I was sitting near the window, and there was another 2 in their group across the aisle. I got talking to them, and one of them spoke very good English, 2 of them did, and they wanted to know what I was doing and where was I going. I told them. I said, I'm going to Kiev, I'm speaking on television, and what are you talking about? And I said, one of the things I'm talking about, is there a God? And one of them said, well, is there a God? I said, we've never heard of him. I said, have you heard of Jesus Christ? Oh, only in a couple of pop songs. We think he was probably a good person. And you're trying to tell us he was the Son of God? And I said he was. And I went through, not quite the same as our sermon today, but through Daniel chapter 2. They were quite intrigued, but they weren't sure. By this stage, the 2 across the aisle had left their seats. They were practically sitting on my lap. You know, there is an extreme thirst. People who want to know about God who has been denied them. And God gave me some words, and I want to leave them with you, because they're not my thoughts. But I was prompted by God, and I said, I can give you a question. And if you accept this question and ask it yourself in faith, you will receive proof that there is a God. I'm going to share it with you. It is absolutely 100% bomb-proof. By this time, they were really listening, and so was one flight attendant. I said, here is the question. And as soon as I say it, folks, you realize it's not from me, it's from God. And I believe you will accept it. Here is the question. If you are an agnostic, if you are an atheist, if you are a nothing, here is the question. God, if you are in existence, reveal yourself to me. Full stop. End of question. He will. When you think about it, if you in sincerity say to God, I don't know whether you are in existence, but if you are, I challenge you to reveal yourself. Do you believe that? You do. You know, we're not a big crowd here today. I know there's a load of bull in town this week. As I flew in yesterday, I could see that something was happening because there's cars everywhere. And here we are, just a small group of people, worshipping on the one day that God said you should be worshipping. Nobody else is. The whole world has been deceived. The whole world is coming to a point where the younger people are taught to question whether there is a God. I know you believe it. You don't. It's very hard to remain an atheist when you're on your deathbed. When you're a young university student and the world is before you, God doesn't have to exist in their mind. But God exists. And you and I are not here today by accident. You can be in your 90s with one foot on a banana skin and another one in the grave, and there is still a work for you to do. You can be a 7-year-old child at school and your faith can shine like the little girl who revealed her faith to Naaman the leper. We have the most fantastic privilege. We also have the most fantastic responsibility. God is coming. He's coming soon. He's coming ready or not. God bless you.